Good afternoon, everybody. This is Ana Draguțescu connecting with you through this webinar from ICLE European Secretariat in Freiburg, Germany. I will be your host and moderator for today. We are very pleased you all joined us today. We have around 50 attendees so far, and we hope that this is going to be a very interesting immersion in the very important topic of inclusive urban mobility planning that addresses all city users and especially the most vulnerable ones and their needs. Since we have celebrated the International Women's Day just a few days ago, I would like to take this opportunity to honor and dedicate this webinar to all women who impact us every day, who have a loud voice and who fight to make this world a better place for all of us. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few issues with you in order to have a smooth participation in this event. You can connect using your computer or by dialing in using your phone. If you would prefer to join over the phone, just select phone call in the audio panel and all the necessary information will be displayed. Then you will only need to enter the PIN code. The default setting is that all attendees are muted in order to avoid background noise. You can only be unmuted by us. By raising your hand, you will be able to let us know you have either a question or a comment, and we will reply either by unmuting you or through a written comment using the chat. You can also use the chat to ask a question or leave a comment for us or for one of the speakers. Please keep your questions short and direct. Let's do a check. Please raise your hand if you can hear me. We'll wait for a couple of seconds to see whether all attendees can hear me well. Okay. So I'm being heard. Moreover, our speakers will ask along the webinar a few questions using the polls to collect your input and your feedback regarding the discussed topic. You will see the polls on your screen when the time comes. Just on a general note, this webinar will be recorded and all registered participants will receive the recording once the webinar has ended. Our lineup for today, we have 4 female speakers, so it's an exclusively female webinar coming from different corners of Europe. Bronwyn Thornton is the CEO of Walk21, the global organization leading the walking movement. She gives walking a voice on the international stage and works with local communities to create more walkable streets and neighborhoods. Linda Gustafsson from the city of Umeå. She is a gender equality officer and coordinator for the Commission on Social Sustainability for the city of Umeå. She is also working with an initiative from the European Commission called Gender Equal Cities, and is a member of the Swedish Ministry of Enterprise and Innovation's Advisory Board on Feminist City Planning. Pilar Martín de Castro is a psychologist and is the head of the Environmental Education Unit of the Madrid City Council, and Isabela Velázquez is project manager and founder partner of GEA21. Pilar and Isabela are the coordination team of our project CIVITAS ECCENTRIC. And as I said before, I'm Ana Draguțescu. I'm a mobility officer working for the ICLE European Secretariat. Our agenda for today, We'll enclose my introduction to the topic presentation. Then we'll hear from Bronwen on walkability for everyone, why it matters. We'll hear also from Linda about the gender landscape of Umeå, Sweden, how the city creates pleasant and safe public spaces and facilitates mobility for women. And we'll wrap up with a presentation from Pilar and Isabella on mobility for vulnerable groups, good practice from the city of Madrid. Just a few words from my side about CIVITAS Eccentric. So CIVITAS Eccentric is a project that demonstrates in 5 living labs the potential and replicability of integrated and inclusive urban planning approaches, innovative policies, and emerging technologies. The 5 implementation cities are Madrid, Stockholm, Munich, Turku, and Russe, and they demonstrate and test innovative sustainable mobility in peripheral areas, combining new policies, technologies, and soft measures. Across the project, there will be 50 measures implemented in the 5 above-mentioned cities, and they are clustered in 6 thematic areas. Inclusive urban planning, mobility as a service, safe walking and cycling, clean public transport, clean vehicles, and clean freight logistics. As part of the CIVITAS Eccentric, we organize these thematic webinars. This is the first webinar, the first thematic webinar we organize. There will be up to 5 webinars about cross-cutting themes that surpass the strict boundaries of the demo work packages. Some of the topics we have chosen are addressing vulnerable groups and gender issues, our webinar for today, financing, procurement, and contracting of some measures, and some policies for peripheral districts, or inclusion of city logistics in SUMPs. Just a few words about the topic before we hand over to our speakers. Why is accessibility so important for us all? Because 1 in 10 people in Europe is over the age of 60, and according to the United Nations, 10% of the population has some type of disability. In 2017, nearly 1/5, that is 19% of the EU population, was aged 65 years old or more. Achieving this target of sustainability in urban mobility also means considering the needs of different users and thereby offering equal levels of accessibility to transport to all different groups. To make transport accessible and user-friendly for everyone, travel opportunities need to be equitable for all. While speed and efficiency of travel are always important, the ease with which these destinations are accessed in terms of proximity and convenience is essential. Mobility is thus determined by the extent to which the city as a whole is accessible to all its residents, including people with disabilities, those with low incomes, seniors, young people, or people with children. Significant social benefits can be achieved for vulnerable and to a less favored user groups with a high level of coverage offered by urban mobility networks, new technologies, and urban amenities that reduce isolation, vulnerability, and dependence. Walking is fundamental to mobility. The physical act of walking and the infrastructure that facilitates it are important values to both the individual and the society. The value that walking creates is very often overlooked. The vast majority of fatalities are pedestrians. We'll hear more about walking from Bronwen very soon. Gender equity is also a very important issue and vital for mobility. Lower employment rates, part-time roles, and low-wage positions are only some of the factors which determine the difference between genders in the labor market, in social life, and of course in transport behavior. The picture that emerges is that women travel differently than men in relation to transport modes used, to distance traveled, and the daily number of trips, and their patterns and the different purposes. Inclusion through mobility and addressing the needs of the most vulnerable is a very important issue we have to always think of when planning mobility. Developing an inclusive urban transport system with better access for all has an impact on ensuring the human rights of all citizens. Good practice in the field of transport accessibility is an evolving concept that should lead to focus on the policy or strategy of the local authorities, to represent the start of a paradigm shift in urban public transport for disabled and vulnerable groups, and to eliminate the barriers to public transport for the disabled, elderly, and other transport vulnerable citizens. The greatest challenge thus for transportation professionals is to develop a system, a good system for urban transport that meets the basic mobility needs for urban dwellers. On this note, I am inviting now our first speaker to the stage, Bronwyn Thornton, the CEO of Walk21. Her presentation will be about how walking is the foundation of our mobility systems and is essential for ensuring equitable, independent mobility for everyone. Bronwyn, the stage is yours.
Thanks very much, Anna. I'm just bringing up my presentation. I think that will be clear to everybody. And hello, everybody. I understand there's people from a vast array of countries, so welcome to the webinar and to my presentation. For those of you who know Walk21, mostly probably think of us and in association with our conferences. And as you would be aware, we have been hosting them since the year 2000 in countries around the world. And this year we'll be in Rotterdam in October. It's getting quite crowded there in Europe. And we're looking forward, after 4 years in other cities, to be coming back to Europe and seeing the progress and developments around walking. But Walk21 is much more than a conference, and we now represent the work that we do in this diagram, which is advocacy, knowledge, and capacity work, with the conferences there as the top. If you're in retail, you have a flagship store. Conferences is that. It's our bringing everybody together. But we also represent walking at international forums and events. We have a range of resources and tools for people to use. We run training and are developing our network for cross-fertilization and sharing globally to advance the walking agenda. And why do we do it? Because it's about people. It's about our humanity. And it's about all of us. Today is focusing particularly on what's considered the more vulnerable groups in our communities, people with slightly different needs from the most able-bodied amongst us. And you can see in these images some of those people.
Hey, Bronwyn, sorry for disrupting you, but we cannot see your screen right now.
You cannot see it?
No.
All my great pictures. Sorry, I thought it was already. Is that better?
Yes, now we can see. Yes, good.
Okay, so there's my slide about conferences, which I've spoken on already. Didn't want to miss that one. It took me ages to do that green arrow. Now, okay. So this is the Walk21 wheel I was mentioning in terms of the different elements of who we are and what we do. And we are currently running training in workshops in Africa and Asia and South America around creating walkable cities. So if you would like to hear more about those, please do be in touch. And this is my slide of trying to capture the diversity and the humanity of the 7.3 billion in the world, which is why we are motivated here at Walk 21 to promote walking. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this global sort of perspective, because that's where I work, but also how that comes back to the local community, because this is tying into the Sustainable Urban Mobility Planning, and many of you will know that we have SUMPs 2 coming out in June, and the word I want to pick up on here through this conversation around vulnerable groups is the sustainability agenda, which can mean a lot of different things to different people, but it was fairly comprehensively defined when the world adopted the Sustainable Development Goals. We worked quite hard at the time to have transport as one of these goals, but it wasn't given its own box in the chart. But as you can see by the circles on this chart, walking has something to offer. People walking and walkable communities has something to offer all of the circled elements there. And in fact, if you stretch the concept a little bit further, it's almost all of the boxes will gain from walkable communities, except perhaps 14, life below water. So let's start with good health and well-being. I'm only going to select a few of these, the ones that are most pertinent, about why walking matters. And that is the lack of activity in Western, mostly Western, but increasingly globally, and the health consequences of that lack of activity. And many of us will know about these elements, but also that it's an increasing phenomenon. The more we motorize, the less we move, the more we are gaining weight. And even if we are not gaining weight, the lack of activity is detrimental to our health. Walkable communities, 270,000 pedestrians are killed every year. And Anna's already mentioned the significance of road safety. The majority of these is radically overrepresented in countries, low-income countries like Africa, but we all have something to answer for in terms of this carnage that is on our roads. And it's not only killing us by knocking people down, but the world's air quality is increasingly getting worse. And in cities like London, you might look at this and think, well, that's China, or that's Beijing, that's India, or somewhere like that. But whilst the air quality in Europe tends to be generally better than in some Asian cities, certainly around London, the research is now in that the poor air quality and the impact on children's health is significant. And as mentioned already, gender and gender equality, vulnerable group particularly, is women's safety in public space, and it is an increasingly clear issue, particularly around mobility, not just that women fear for their safety, but they actually experience harassment in public space. And one of the pieces of research the International Transport Forum brought out recently highlighted that your gender has an impact on your transport choices to a level that they hadn't previously appreciated, because they'd never looked at it before. And the more we know and the more we understand about the impact of gender on our mobility choices, the more surprising it is. And it can only continue to reveal these differences until we start to address it. Under Sustainable Development Goal number 11, which 11.2 is essentially where transport comes in. And this is so critical to understand that the value of investing in walking is incredibly high. So it's the bias against walking has been long-standing, but the shift is coming and the economic analysis is coming. And if we are going to have sustainable cities and sustainable communities, we have to invest in walking, and it's a very cost-effective investment at that. And not only for the build cost of actually building sidewalks and the capacity that that brings into a street, but also the retail uplift and the economic benefit for local economies, for small local shops, and local services is enabled by walkable communities. So there's a range of benefits and reasons about why it matters. I've captured those: our health, our social security, our economic benefits, the quality of our environments, the essential sustainability of our communities, just as our mobility as humans is underpinned by the fact that we walk, that we start with one foot in front of the other. No matter what other mode we take, then the sustainability of our humanity can be pinned down to creating better walkable communities as well. I think the next slide, Christina, is my poll. So if you could bring that up, that would be great. And if people could answer this, that would be appreciated. And if it's helpful for me to clarify, the question is, do you have direct responsibility for improving walkability or promoting walkability? Direct means you don't have to have it in your job title, because not many people have that. But in your work, in your day, do you actually have a responsibility for making walkability? And the options are yes, no, sometimes, or you don't know. I'm not sure how long we should wait, Christina. Perhaps you can tell me.
Yes, we have 81% of the participants
Great.
who have voted. So if nobody else wants to add their vote, then let's close it in a few seconds.
Sure. I used to ask this, does anyone have walking in their job title? And you'd never get any hands up in the room. More recently, you get a few hands up now. People are recognizing it. It's normally hooked on after the word cycling. But so can we have the results? Okay, great. Well, I'm really glad. Oh, that's 2% don't know. And I'm trying to see that. Is it 35% said yes? 25% said no, and 38% said sometimes. So that's the reason I asked this question, is because the first thing that people have to do is have a sense of responsibility that it's in their work to deliver on walkability. The next thing you actually need, of course, is enabling institutions, management, resources, funding, and all those elements to make it hang together. Let me see now. So when we talk about, and I like the sometimes, it's part of a broader sense of people's job responsibilities, and it's that sense of integrating walking and the value of having it identified across a range of departments or a range of responsibilities is actually going to be longer term beneficial for generating walkable cities. I think it's really important to clarify what is walkability, because a lot of people in the world are walking in environments that wouldn't tick any boxes for safety, for comfort, for ease of walking, but they walk out of necessity. And so this definition is just, I share it with you as one by a professor emeritus. So he's been thinking about this for a while. But walkability, and the key words here, is the extent to which the built environment supports and encourages walking, providing for comfort and safety, connecting with varied destinations with reasonable time and effort, and offering visual input in journeys through the net. Visual interest in journeys throughout the network. So it captures all the elements that perhaps you already understand about walking. It's about having destinations, it's about comfort, it's about safety, it's about making it visually interesting. The words that we like here is reasonable time and effort, because everywhere we travel, people say, oh, we'd walk more, but the weather. oh, the weather's no good for walking here. And that weather can be hot and sweaty Hong Kong, or it can be freezing cold North Canada. But there's always weather. So it's not about whether the weather is the reason that we can't do walking. It's how do we accommodate the weather? How do we accommodate our expectations despite the weather? And what's reasonable in the different contexts that we ask people to walk? So at Walk 21, we have the International Charter for Walking, and we have 8 principles in that, which we, many of you will probably know, and I'm going to talk through the most pertinent ones today in relation to this, our concerns for vulnerable groups. I'm focusing here particularly on the very young, those that want their independence and be able to move in our communities, and also the elderly as they start to lose their capacity to be driven or to drive themselves in a vehicle, as well as the people in the middle with mobility impairments, or for women, the impact on their mobility movements. So here's an image of someone signing the charter, and I invite you all to sign the International Charter for Walking. It's available on our website. It's signed by mayors and transport departments and agencies around the world, but it's also signed by individuals. So principle 1, and crucially at Walk 21, principle 1 is increased inclusive mobility. It's essential that we start with our humanity, that we centre people and we make sure that walkable environments are inclusive for everybody. The research shows now that old people won't leave their homes if they don't have a safe walkable environment. That leads to social isolation, that has a direct impact on their health. But we don't talk just, as I've said already, we don't talk just about people with disabilities here, but it's about everybody who wants to access our communities. It's about the very young. Look at the joy on this little boy's face as he's able to move and engage with other children in his community. And it's that joy of walking that we need to build and enable throughout our communities and throughout our lives. You've seen this already. Hannah put up this diagram about the different travel patterns of men and women. And interestingly, these travel patterns are consistent globally, whether you're in wealthier countries or in poorer countries. They start to shift slightly as more women move into the workforce, but even then, women tend to do a lot more of this trip chaining and a lot of these local tasks. And the other critical factor from this CIVITAS policy note, and if you haven't read this, I recommend you go and find that. It's very easy to find on the CIVITAS website, and it's got lots of great information. But the things I want to highlight down here when we're thinking about gender and transport is not just the different trip patterns that you can see in that diagram. And if you look at starting with the diagram, think how much easier that is if all those places were close and you could walk to them and you wouldn't be spending all that time in cars stuck in traffic. So local services, walkable communities are much more enabling for women's travel patterns than motorised long distance journeys. So down below, in terms of the modal split, there's some really critical factors here. Now, obviously, I wanted to highlight walking, but let's notice everything else. Women are less likely to drive in the car than men. They're more likely to use public transport, and they're much more likely, nearly double the mode share of walking. So if you want to talk about providing for women's movement, we have to talk about creating walkability in our communities. And the relationship with public transport is something I'm going to come back to in a couple of slides. So please don't forget those statistics. Principle 2 of the Charter is well-designed and managed spaces and places for people. And this is a picture actually from Rotterdam. And it's the simplest thing. You can see young and old people spending time being in public space. And this enables people, this invites them to come and walk in our communities. You cannot build an unattractive environment and then say, well, people don't sit here, so therefore they're not walking, we don't need to provide for them. You build these environments, it attracts people, it creates more people walking. And that's critical for the health agenda. And this is the Global Action Plan for Physical Activity, released by the World Health Organization last year, and identified 4 key critical elements: active societies, active environments, which is walkable communities, active systems, which is the governance, and active people, which is the programs and opportunities. If you don't have active environments, the research clearly shows that people are less active. And the cost-benefit analysis of active travel, why does walkability matter? Because the more we walk, as part of our everyday activities, we get a 10-to-1 cost benefit to society and to our health. Improved integration of networks is principle 3 of the Charter, and this is the critical relationship between walking and public transport. Everyone says, oh, well, walking, it's only the first mile or the last mile, or it's too short, or it takes too much time. That's true, and this lovely thing here is called a journey extender. So if we think of all our journeys as starting on foot and ending on foot, and then we utilize some mechanical means to cover some further distances. But when we think about our transport systems, we focus on that mechanical means instead of the entire journey, even when very often people are spending longer walking to and from that mechanical means than they spend on it. And why is this important? Because using public transport and walking have a closer relationship than walking and cycling, even though walking and cycling live in an active mobility bubble, but in terms of its relationship. And this is a study from Norway. I love these statistics. When you ask people about their experience on public transport, they talk more about the journey to and from the public transport than they do about the time spent on the actual bus itself. And as you can see, time-wise, it's about a 50-50 split between spending time walking and spending time on the bus. And in terms of access to that service, 86% of them in this study are walking. So if we want people to use public transport, which is a critical component of a high-capacity transport system and a sustainable mobility system, we have to build walking in to access that transport. And this is a great example in Washington, D.C., low-density housing. They have recognized that the best investment to underpin the fiscal viability of their system is to increase walking access to public transport. There's 1,200 houses here, and there's the station, and people can't walk from there to there. By building that short link, they have done the calculation, which says that for every 10 houses they connect, they get 7 more rides per week. And what's interesting about that, the other thing about creating safe and walking and cycling access to stations is that it reduces their paratransit costs. So people with disabilities who can't access the stations except in vehicles and by additional paratransit, they are now able to access those stations, and so the fiscal viability is underpinned by more walkable communities. And the other critical factor in the relationship between public transport and walking is that by building good public transport systems, you can build in walkability. These stations in Hong Kong connect neighborhoods. You don't have to go to the station. You can walk through the station to move through your community. And they improve the permeability, they improve the safety of these neighborhoods, and they ultimately improve the walkability. Principle 5, road danger reduction. Many people don't let their children walk to school because they are scared of traffic. It's understandable. You'd never forgive yourself if it happened. But how have we built a society that says that our children should be driven everywhere just because we can't create a safe environment? And the World Health Organization reduced this resource a couple of years ago about pedestrian safety, which identified the principles of the Charter as underpinning a safe systems approach. And if anyone is working in road safety, you'll understand that safe systems approach and the importance of building an environment that is safe for everybody. And by building more walkability, lowering traffic speeds, widening pavements, reducing crossing times, all of these elements create a safer space for walking and make it safer for everybody in the system. Crime and fear of crime, we've talked already about women, and the same thing goes with women protecting their children from stranger danger. And we have to address this through building better environments so everybody can walk down the street as happily as the women in this picture. So I'm trying to move fairly quickly here. I think my time is nearly done. So I wanted to just bring to your attention the importance, some elements and resources to wrap it up. So here's an image of the International Charter for Walking and the other elements of that, which are around how we manage our land use planning, how we as authorities implement these things and develop a culture of walking. This is a resource that we did with the German government with the New Urban Agenda, which captures some of these elements that you can find on our website. And there's loads and loads of resources out there. There's the World Health policy agenda. There's the pedestrian safety menu, but the economic benefits. This is the Pedestrians First was developed by ITDP and has a huge range of indicators about how to measure walkability at a city, neighborhood, and street level. It's massive, it's complicated, but there's so much good material in there to go in and find and understand. And then when you come to want to understand how to change the street, UN Habitat have done Streets for Walking and Cycling. The Global Street Design Guide is highly effective. I know there's lots of good case studies on ELTIS and other resources being developed across the European Commission. And if you need to make the case, then there's more and more resources around how good it is for business. But the essence, the essential thing, if nothing else, what we have to do for walking to make it accessible and inviting for everybody, let's just remember we have to make it safe, we have to make it easy, and we have to make it nice. And these are 3 guides that will get you started on that agenda. So coming back to the SUMPs, we're in the process of the SUMP 2, and we are developing, because there isn't enough guidance in these, and I've looked at a few SUMP guidelines, I've been on the jury a couple of times, and we really need to be ambitious for walking. We have to stop thinking it's only a downtown option, it's only a waterfront option. We have to look at how we can integrate it and build it into our communities, using public transport as a journey extender, supporting local services and local resources. So we are doing, at Walk 21, we are leading on a practitioner's briefing note for the new SUMP guidelines. And I invite you, please, to contribute. This is a collection of ideas and analysis of some opportunities to support other people to do better for walking. At the moment, we're going for a practitioner briefing. We want to work towards having a comprehensive topic guide and just see the importance of walking underpinning SUMPs, walking prioritised and informing the entire mobility systems of these towns. So please be in touch with your ideas, and we really, really do want your input. And lastly, an invitation to join us in Rotterdam. 2 things on this. First of all, actually, I didn't mention is in September, European Mobility Week this year is safe walking and cycling, and we're going to be profiling any activities that have been undertaken for that at the conference. But come, we're in Europe, please come, share, talk with us, walk with others. Let's lift walking further up the agenda. This year is a great start with European Mobility Week and the conference, but we're in conversation with the European Commission to move it even further up the agenda, and that means resources and projects and commitments and engagement. So thank you very much, and I'll pass back to the other presenters.
Thank you, Bronwyn. This was a great presentation, and we already have a couple of questions for you. Let's start with the first one from Matthew. I love the support for walking and realize that we need more robust infrastructure to support walking. But what about those that cannot walk or have difficulty walking?
Okay, so I assume you mean people with wheelchairs or mobility devices, and clearly there are always going to, but also people sometimes with mental health challenges find it more difficult to move in our communities. I think that I have 2 things. One is that actually we can build environments for people with physical needs. So there's lots of guidance now around how to make an environment more legible for people, how to put down guidance for people with vision impairments. The Japanese have even developed systems so that people can get a sound to help them track across the road. But if we build these walkable environments, wider footpaths with level crossings and things like that, it enables people with mobility challenges still to access their community. Walkability includes these people, it doesn't exclude them.
Thank you. I have one very short question, even though we'll have a wrap-up session at the end of the presentations with questions and answers, but just a quick question and comment. So sometimes an environment is safe and walkable, but the perception of safety is different from the users. How do we deal with this situation?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a really important thing to realize that you have to activate space. Space isn't inherently anything until we actually put people in it and we activate it. And if you want to create a new space in the city, there's a couple. Rotterdam is a very interesting case because they've now studied how if you put down AstroTurf, people will spend longer. Invite people to spend time in that space, run activities, ensure the lighting is very good, the sight lines are very good. There are design principles to build out, to build in security and to build out crime. But also the activation and engaging, then that draws people into a space, and those eyes on the street enhance the safety as well. But it requires an effort. You can't just imagine that it's going to happen on its own. Cities have to invest in that as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Bronwyn. I'm going to hand over to Linda. Do we have Linda online? I can't see Linda. So Linda Gustafsson, as I said earlier, is a gender equality officer and coordinator in the city of Umeå, and she's going to speak to us about the gendered landscape, a method developed by Umeå to include a holistic understanding of gendered power structures into urban planning. Linda, can you hear me? No. Then let's continue with the presentation from Madrid and go back to Linda afterwards. Meanwhile, my colleagues from UBC will solve the situation. So we have Pilar and Isabella. The presentation will provide us with an insight about mobility for vulnerable groups, mainly elderly people and children, and about gender differences in the use of cycling among teenagers.
Okay. We are developing the measure 2.8 of eccentric project, and the measure is developed in the schools and also in the social centers for elderly. ¿Me puedes poner la presentación, por favor? La voy pasando. Let's start with elderly. Why is so important to include elderly people? Browen has told very well, but we are living more years, living longer, and having few babies. Then in Madrid, for example, 32% of the inhabitants are more than 55 years old. Then it's not the aging of population, but also the overaging of the population. We, in few years, we are having a lot of people elderly. And then I agree with Browen also, it's not only a problem, a social problem. Of course, it's, the humanity is very important, but also is very important the economic reason, because if they stop consuming and only having social services, it could be very expensive for the administration. Then we think keeping them active and autonomous is crucial for the society, for the better world that you spoke. Also, we are our living lab in Vallecas, that is one of the lowest incomes, one of the poorest districts on Madrid, and there is a lot of unemployment, and there is a high rate immigrants, low educational level. Then it's not an easy place. But we have found several groups of elderly people that are able to work with us, making a lot of things. The first thing, we conducted a mobility study, and we can see here that most of them are autonomous, 66%, and the men also, we agree here, the men are going out for more reason than women. They are going out for to leisure or cultural activities or sport activities, and the women are more shopping, but it's not meaningful, the difference. Then what is important is I have to say that the average age is 76. Then it's very old people, and they don't drive anymore. They only are going by bus or on foot. Most of them on foot. For they are very important to improve the pedestrian way. They were also asked what should we do to increase the pedestrian way, and they answer that improving the sidewalks, the sidewalk cleaner, the traffic light more time to cross the pedestrian, the more benches in the streets, because there are very few. You know, Madrid is very touristic, and most of the chairs are of private restaurant or cafes, and there are not so many benches for pedestrian. Then the other thing that was important is they don't make journeys to the city center. They make short trips keeping in the neighborhood. They will use more public transport if they feel more respected, because in the bus or on the bus they don't feel respected, and on the underground they need more lifts. It's difficult to access for them. We focus on the pedestrian way, and we made with them itineraries you can see in the pictures that they take ramps that doesn't comply legislation, don't fit for the wheelchair, areas without accessibility, pavement damage, benches that they don't use because they are dirty or cold or with bees nest there. Other thing we asked ourselves is, are we providing them with what they need? Because we put the exercise areas for elderly, but they don't use to do exercise with hands, with fingers, no, nothing. They rather prefer playing balls, and they are sitting like you can see in the picture at the right. They are sitting on the wall than on the bench. Then there are misused or unused furniture that we are not doing the things very well, we feel. They describe their ideal bench and also their ideal neighborhood regarding benches. They said very interesting thing, putting as many benches on the sidewalks as they are sit at private street restaurant, and forcing street restaurant to display a poster on the door that include number of seats according to license, because you know maybe they have a license for 10 square meters and they are doubling the space they take. Speaking about bus, regarding bus, they have made a beautiful experience. They call it the students for the nearby school, and all together made the plot and the acting out of 3 videos denouncing the lack of respect that sometimes people make to them. They are in an humoristic voice and tone, and I recommend you to go to the link and see them after. Also, they create a pedestrian club, walk with us, and that is making twice a week walks in the neighborhood. They design their t-shirt, they asking for a screen in order to know the timetable of the bus, and we install them. They are making a lot of activities that are empowering them. They participate introducing the project to the neighborhood, making opinion workshop on the street with other elderly, designing posters to make a campaign with the mesh dogs. That is for them a problem to walking. They have meeting with the mayors and a lot of things. And also they are well communicators. They spoke on the radio, at the newspaper, in the newspaper, speaking what were their needs, no, more zebra crossing, more cleaner sidewalk, etc. And we are now speaking about children. We are using with them the same methodology, is to say to do campaigns made for them and addressed for them also, for the mates of the school. The goal is, of course, improving increasing the active trips by bike, but also on foot. But also for us, it's important because in Madrid there are no so many bike lanes, infrastructures. Then we focus also on the foot mobility. It's important to create the culture of sustainable mobility. We accredited the school according the points they obtain in making things, not only with the school and the parents and the teacher, but also in the neighborhood, the campaigns. One essential tool for us was the teacher workshop that at first was only a space to interchange ideas or experiences, but finally it became a network of cyclist people in Madrid, a lot of them joining association of cyclists and things like that. It's very, very useful for us. Isabella invented the tool. And also we have made a lot of food boxes and bike boxes, and we are celebrating the parking day and making a lot of bike rides in the European Mobility Week, but also in the Christmas, in the Environment Day, in the International Day of Deutschland, with the very ambassador that helps us to giving us bikes and speaking on the radio, promoting the urban cycling. Then well, you can see the pictures. Another to improve the awareness, we have made talks about climate change, and we have 3 mobility exhibitions that itinerant they are going by the schools. And also one thing that is important is not only our department is involved in the subject, but a lot of several departments of the city council are working with us. For example, security, the police is training the teenagers and children and even the families and teachers. For example, the doctors of the city council are making workshop to tell how healthy is to go by bike. and also the urban technician are making workshops very interesting for teenagers, because they are playing for a morning. They are playing with real site maps, designing the bike lane in the neighborhood where the school is. Then it's very funny for them. And the most useful maybe is the training in communication technique. They are making a radio interview, video, photography, music, graffiti, and theater workshop that enable them to make later the campaigns. We can see some, for example, music workshop. They are composing a song, and then in the bike ride they are singing, or they are. We make a contest every year, one for primary school, another for secondary school. That is about graphic design, videos, slogan. And maybe we are printing in T-shirt the winners' work. You can see some of the poster, or also it's important for us the dissemination with our two blogs, Stars Madrid and Eccentric. It is proved that it's useful not only for teachers, but also for stakeholders or technicians that want to know the news. And speaking about the outcomes, it's not spectacular, but it's not bad result to have decreased 4 points the people going to school by car, and the bicycle was only 1%, but now it's 2%. It's doubling. It's not too much. But what is more important, maybe, in best result is not the actual trips, but the wished trips. The car is decreasing 9 points, and bicycle is increasing 5. And there are also, to speak about qualitative result. For us is a way that a project to increase, to empower people, teenagers, and to raise awareness about the relationship between the use of the bike and the public space. And about gender, we can to say we have a guide just 2 years ago, and the Department of Equality is making a lot of activities about gender and public space, and they are very successful. A lot of people is signing up, but the first time we ask ourselves, why do we have to address the gender issue? It's because in the bike rides and in the bike bus in primary school, more or less, girls and boys are the same number. But in secondary, we have only one girl every three boys. I don't speak very well English, as you can see. And then we asked what is happening, why the girls are getting off the bike when they get secondary, and also they get off not only the bike, they stop making a sport or doing a sport, and it seems they stop moving during adolescence. Then we decided to perform a group, a bike gender group, we call it, and it was in order to discover, to find out what were the bias, the stereotypes, the feeling, the thoughts they have about the gender. And we have found that girls and boys agree with the same stereotypes. They thought, all of them, boys and girls, that the girl have more, face more risk, the girl has more to lose, that the girl is a better planner, but a false person. And the boys are they have more freedom, more initiative, they are more stubborn, they are a little more aggressive, but the aggressiveness is seen, unfortunately, is seen as an inherent kind of thing of masculinity. And in the second session, we distribute them by pairs, and they work about one problem each pair, and they have to devise two solutions for every problem, making a role playing about the situation. The situation could be whatever, who paid the Coca-Cola, who is arriving late at home, all that. We can say that the girls repress qualities and capacities that don't fit with the ideals of feminine fragility. The skills of the cyclist and also the attire is seen by some girls and boys as unfeminine. And the other thing that is very important, the girls feel insulted by comments made by some pedestrians, but mainly by car drivers. We have to say that car drivers in Madrid are beginning to tolerate cyclists, and they consider very annoying element, the bike line, the bikes. But male cyclists are not as attacked by car drivers' comments as female cyclists are. So we think we could be facing a phenomenon of motorized gender, and the students perform a campaign to encouraging girls going by bike. They made the photograph on the posters, and we have now in May to measure if we have changed something. We don't know if we have some success about. And that is all.
Thank you, Pilar. I know we have two polls from you, so Cristina, if you can put up the polls coming from Pilar and Isabella. So please vote whether urban cycling is used as a modality of displacement in your city, especially by men, especially by women, or same for men as for women.
Nosotros no lo podemos hacer.
Okay, so we have about 62% of votes. If you can quickly make your choice so we can show you the results. Few more seconds. Okay. So let us show you the results of the first poll. So here you can see that 56% voted for same for men as for women, and 41 voted for especially by men. Okay, that's something to keep in mind, and I guess Pilar can comment on that, what she thinks, but let's do the other poll as well. So can you please choose your answer? Few more seconds to answer. So pick your choice. Okay. There you go. Quite diverse. So if Pilar, you would like to quickly comment.
You are very lucky to have that ratio of women cycling. Very, very lucky.
Okay. Thank you. And we will give floor to Linda next.
Linda, can you hear me? I can't hear you.
Okay, now I'm unmuted.
Yes.
Very good.
Okay. So we'll hear from Linda about the gendered landscape, a method developed by Umeo to include a holistic understanding of gendered power structures into urban planning. Good luck.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, I'm gonna need some, okay, to get my presentation. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Okay, I'm having a little bit of, I apologize for some technical difficulties. I want to share my screen with you, but I cannot really find them. Maybe someone could help me with that. Okay, very good. Okay, now I'm on my way. Okay, so here we go. Sorry about that.
We cannot see your presentation.
Can you see my presentation now? I'm
No.
sharing the screen. No?
No.
Okay. Okay, we'll just oh no, it's not working.
Linda, I have your presentation. I can put it up. With Christina, can you make me presenter? There it is.
Okay, I cannot see anything, but that's fine. I cannot see the presentation, but let's get on our way. My name's Linda Gustafsson. I work with gender equality as a gender equality officer for the city of Umeå. I'm also a coordinator of the Commission on Social Sustainability. And Umeå has tried to work on integrating an understanding of gendered power structure into urban planning and mobility planning. And in my presentation, there is a peek of the method that we use to understand the issue on equality in planning. And I also wanted to show you 2 good examples on how to work with gender segregated statistics when it comes to mobility planning, and also 1 example of the built environment. Okay. Umeå has had a goal of gender equality for a long time. And there is also a specific political committee connected to the city council, making sure that all decisions made by the city council have a gender equality analysis as the basis of their decisions. For Umeå, having this political mandate has been very important to do the long time work that is needed when it comes to gender equality, since working with that is not a quick fix. It's something that you need to work with continuously. Having an overall goal on gender equality also means that every department of the city needs to work on gender equality. So, for example, when it comes to mobility planning, when it comes to urban planning, the streets and parks department, the detailed planning department, the building permits department, all of them need to integrate that overall goal into the work of their department. And one of the strategies for Umeå's growth, and for those of you who do not know Umeå, it is a city of about 127,000 people, and it grows with about 1,500 to 200,000 people per year. And it's in a university city and with a very young average age of 38. And the strategies for the growth of Umeå is, as I said, one of them is very clearly to integrate an understanding of gender equality into the planning processes of the city. So, since I cannot see my presentation, I don't really know where we're at, but I'm just gonna have my presentation and then hopefully we're sort of doing it picture by picture. So, working on integrating an understanding of gendered power structures into urban planning and mobility, how does that work? I'm hoping we're now in a picture with a circle and arrows. Yes, very good. We try to have a holistic approach on gender equality, meaning that we focus on the place that is the city. So, an understanding that women and men use and feel differently about public space due to the fact that we know that they spend their free time in different ways. We know that women are affected by gender-based violence. We know that they use different types of transportation also, and we know that they have different sorts of economies or finances, resources. We have a gender segregated labor market. Women have more responsibility for the unpaid housework, and who is viewed as a primary caregiver, and also expectations when it comes to gender. So having that holistic understanding of what it means and how gender structures work and how that affects people is something that we try to integrate into the planning. And if we then take the next slide, then we will see how we try to make this visible in the city. We have a bus tour that we call the gendered landscape bus tour, the gendered landscape method. And this is actually, we go into a bus with politicians, with civil servants, with private companies and others, and we go through the city in the bus. And now we also have a web page where you can watch short clips of this that we call the gendered landscape. But in the bus tour, then we go through the city, and based on what I talked about on the previous slide, it's trying to highlight that in the city, to try to create an understanding among people working with urban planning, what gender unequal structures can mean. So for example, we go past one of the largest public employers in Umeå is the university hospital. And then we integrate the understanding that at the university hospital, which is, as I said, a big public employer, a lot of women work. And outside the hospital is one of the hubs for public transportation in Umeå. And it's very easy to take public transportation from the university hospital. And then we go by bus and we look at one of the largest private employers, which have a larger amount of men employed. And it's very difficult to take public transportation to that workplace. But it's very easy to take your car because there's a large parking lot. So that is the understanding of the gendered landscape that we try to show through this bus tour. So if we take the next slide, and now you're gonna have to, Anna, you're gonna have to click a couple of times, because if we started the first, if you attended the seminar at the CIVITAS conference in September in Umeå, you might have seen this slide if you were at the seminar on this topic that we're talking about today. But this is a very easy way for us to also show what it means to integrate an understanding of the gendered landscape. Because traditionally we have maybe looked at, and this is the example of a bike lane, and traditionally we might have looked at this as a way of trying to create transportation for people going from their homes and going to their work in the best possible way, and to try to encourage sustainable modes of transportation. But if you click on this, Anna, you're gonna see that integrating an understanding of gender equality means understanding that people live their lives in different ways. Not everyone lives in a one-family house. We have people who live in different types of housing, and that not everyone, women, for example, as I said earlier, work quite to a high extent in care, meaning that they work all over the city. We also know that women take their bikes to a higher extent than men. We know that we don't go straight from our work or from our home to our work. We go past a preschool and leave our children, and we go past a school to pick up our children. When we're on our way from work, we know that even though every person, if you ask them, says that they hate doing grocery shopping right after work, we still know that 60% of people do actually do their grocery shopping straight after work. So planning a city and understanding this landscape of the preconditions as how people live, and also integrating, of course, is it summertime? Is it winter time? Are you going to activities late at night? Understanding women's feelings of insecurity in public spaces, and how then what time of day it is that also affects. So if we're at the end of this slide, then you will see that this is a way for us to also highlight, when it comes to planning of bike lanes, for example, that we need to really understand the everyday life of people and not plan for this maybe in a more traditional way of understanding the needs. So if we keep going, now we should be on a slide with a girl riding her bike, and it says a good practice, travel behavior. I'm going to mention two good practices in Umeå working when it comes to the gender equality in urban planning and mobility planning. The first one is the travel survey in Umeå, and this is conducted every 5 years. The last one was made in 2015, and it is, of course, segregated by gender. And we can see that women have a lot higher percentage of sustainable travel if we compare them to men. The goal for sustainable travel in 2015 for the city of Umeå was that 55% of all travel should be made by a sustainable mode, meaning walking, riding your bike, or public transportation, meaning the bus. And out of men's travel, they traveled sustainable to 40%, and women 56%. And now, since we have that gender segregated, we can also see, and we use that knowledge in understanding that if men traveled like women, Umeå would have already reached its goals on sustainable travel, because women travel sustainable to 56%, and the goal was 55%. So this means that that knowledge that we get from the gender segregated data that we use, of course, goes into mobility management, because we can see that there are groups that really need to be targeted. For example, workplaces dominated by men, but also a discussion in the city about what investments will pay off. We talk about electrifying the bus fleet, and that is something that we're doing. But to reduce the carbon dioxide emissions, changing the travel patterns of large groups of men would really do that and might be a better investment. But that also means working on challenging what we heard previously, presenters talking about how do we challenge also, for example, the car as something that is connected to power and masculinity. But if we didn't have the statistics, then it would be difficult for us to have those discussions when it comes to mobility. And now I think that there is a poll question, so let's see. Yes.
So now we have 45% of votes, so please keep up voting. 10 more seconds, you have time to record your opinion on that. Okay, you're doing great. A few more seconds. Time. Okay, thank you. I'll close it now.
Yeah, I just think that this is a really important question in answering for your own city or your organization, meaning what is your starting point when you come to working on gender equality connected to urban planning or mobility planning. Do you actually have the data? And if you don't, you need to see if there are ways that you can get the data. So now the slide on creating a space free from expectations. This is my last 2 slides. This is another good practice, safe and secure public space. This is a project in a center part of Umeå, in the very city center, quite close to the river. This is about creating space for everyone, because we know that the municipality or the city of Umeå is a public organization. The investments are done with public money, and meaning that we need to make sure that all inhabitants are heard and that there are spaces for everyone. Our head of the projects department at the Streets and Parks department, she always says that everyone living in Umeå should have a favorite place in the public space. And that means also creating different types of spaces. And we know that young girls are very underrepresented when it comes to dialogue on public space or on urban planning as a whole, or mobility planning. So we had this project where we used something that we called inclusion through exclusion, meaning we only talk to young girls between 15 and 20 years old about this specific part of the park. And we had a lot of workshops instead of a traditional dialogue. And we talked about their experiences of private space, but also specifically on public space. Because one thing that we know in the municipality or in the city of Umeå is that we tend to create spaces for young people that encourage physical activity, and there's nothing wrong with that. But working with these young girls and talking to them about they talked very much about dual expectations of them as young women in the city. They talked about how, as a young woman, you are supposed to be both strong and skinny at the same time. They talked about how you, as a young girl, you're supposed to do very good in school, but you should never show that you need to study. And you should always speak your mind, but you can never be seen as someone being difficult. And when they talked about all these dual expectations, it was really easy for us to understand in the city administration that when they say that they want a space that's free from expectations, we could really understand that. So this is an example of how we try to use a more norm-critical dialogue and including voices that are not usually heard into a planning of a particular built environment, also very much in the city center, to make sure that these young women and what they want in a public space can also take place in a very central part of the city. So, and the next slide is what it looks like now. And that is my last slide. So just to conclude, it's important, we have found it extremely important to have gender segregated statistics and then to do the analysis. We have a goal on working with gender equality, which is really important, a goal that's about power. But it's also, as I showed, as Anna showed on some of the slides, it's about understanding the everyday life of different groups in the city. And then also these last couple of slides to try to have dialogue with citizens in new and in norm-critical ways, and to integrate an understanding that gendered power structures also play a role in who says what at what time. And then my very last is that also in the administration of your organization or of your city or municipality, to also be aware of, we have worked with that also in Umeå, to be aware of our own power, having a critical eye on yourself and understanding that not everyone lives the life that you yourself live. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Linda. Just one remark from my side. If you would have to formulate a question or sentence for the cities that are now listening to us, there are a lot of representatives from cities across Europe, and not only. If you have one sentence to encourage them to start working on this gender equality and equity in their city, what would that be? One quick piece of advice, if they haven't started yet to work on this issue.
I would say that it's the only way you're going to develop your city. It's the only way you're going to make it an attractive and a nice place to live if you work on gender equality.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see. So thank you to all our four speakers for today. We had some small hiccups, but I hope you have enjoyed the presentations. We have a short session of questions, so feel free to raise your hand or just already post the question in the chat. We already have a question for Braun, which was asked earlier. So thanks for your great presentation, Bronwen. How can we make sure not to push our disadvantaged people from low-income migrant communities, for example, while creating the welcoming, safe, easy, walkable spaces that are supposedly free of crime? Complicated question.
That's a very big question, because I understand it's touching on that when we make a community more walkable or make the public space more inviting, it's perceived as gentrification. And it does, we do measure success by the economic uplift in terms of the increased value to the retail or the rental spaces around. It's that terrible thing where, because so many places are unattractive and unwalkable, that we have this impact. It's amazing that just making a place more walkable and improving the quality of public space can have such a big impact, because other areas are so poor. But there are lots of ways that you can create walkability without a high level of investment that doesn't have the same gentrification impact on it. And it can be very simple measures in terms of reallocating space with paint or planters, or and not making it a big glamorous deal, but just going out and bringing some interventions into the space at a very low cost. And for example, several cities in the world, even where they've got expensive makeovers into their public spaces, they can't afford. And San Sebastian, beautiful, beautiful, pedestrianization throughout the city, but they have no more money. But people still want to have some pedestrianization and some paint on the tarmac. Some changes in the use of the space, some very quick and easy interventions can bring this about without that gentrification impact, or reduce the potential for that. It doesn't always have to be a high-end spend.
Thank you for this answer. We do have a question that came out earlier. I think it was for Pilar. Scooters are all the trend now, but what about small automated vehicles? I think you have mentioned earlier the scooters for some of the users, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't have the exactly the rate about motorized bicycle, but we are very happy with the system, because more and more people are using the system. And at first it was only in 2 districts, and now it's in 7 districts of Madrid, but only in the central Almond.
Can I just comment as well? Because a lot of people say,
yeah, sure.
Walk soon. We'll all have automatic vehicles and autonomous vehicles.
For the moment, it's increasing the use, but obviously it's new people that is going by bike, but electric bike, because people that is used to go every day, they are buying a bike and they are not going by the system public bike.
It's important that a new ordinance to
Get closer to the microphone, please.
sorry. I guess that is important to see that there was a conflict in the sidewalks with cyclists and walkers, and then there is a new ordinance in Madrid to defend the sidewalk is only for walkers. Then the cyclists are vehicles. They have to go in the out of the sidewalk. This is really important to clarify the new situation with more and more cyclists in Madrid.
Like you say, Browner, we are focusing in the new ordinance in the pedestrian way all the time. But it's difficult because people is not used to respect the pedestrian. The cars, the bikes. The other day in the demonstration of Women's Day, for example, there were a group of women going by bike, and the motorbikes went into the sidewalk. They want what they want.
That's true. I have a question ready for Linda. How do we address gender equality in cities of Europe that are rapidly becoming more multicultural due to massive migration? How can an intersectional lens help local governments address this?
Yeah, I think when it comes to the intersectional approach, I think that's of course really important, because we talk about groups of women and groups of men, because within those groups there are of course large differences due to your background and your language and your age and so on. But I believe that from the starting point of, for example, the work we do, from the starting point that you should create the possibility for everyone to have the power over their own life and the society that they live in. I think that then, yes, you need to have an understanding of like the everyday life or the life of the people that when you're working, but from the starting point of trying to create those conditions, I think that then it goes for everyone. Like if it's about migrant women or women who are born in that city or in that country, then it's still the starting point of how do we create the possibilities to have power over your own life. So yeah, I think, yeah.
It's challenging though.
Yeah, it is challenging, and it's a long time work, and it's not just one solution. There are very many solutions at the same time, and you try, and then you make an error, and then you try something else, and then you learn. And then I think the exchange also between European cities on this topic is really important, to really share like best practice or good knowledge, good examples, but also to share the bad examples, like what didn't work, what didn't like push us forward, and then to also learn from that and from each other. So I think that's really important.
We also have a comment on this issue coming from Roberta. I don't know what city she comes from, but she said that thanks, Linda, for talking about spaces where young girls are not duly represented. Our municipality is about to build a skate park and the writer's wall that we fear will exclude young girls. How can we ensure they feel welcome there?
Yeah. Well, we built a skateboarding park in Umeå a couple of years ago, and we had that problem as well. Because a lot of the skateboarders are young men, and when it was built, there was dialogue with an organization or young skaters, but when it opened, we had these you skate girl, it's called, and we had special like training hours for young girls, and when they were welcome or specifically welcome to the skateboarding park and all of that. As the previous speakers also said, it's about activating the space to really try to, because one thing is that how we build it, but then also how we create the conditions for young women to actually feel like that they have the right to be there. But I think it's a challenge, because skateboarding parks is one of the, or at least in many places, one of the spaces that is quite gender segregated.
I wasn't aware of that, but then yeah, it's very interesting. I think we have a question from the city of Porto. Carla, can you hear me? I can't hear you. Can you please write down the question and I'll take it immediately once I see it written. I have another question related to the SUMPs, and I think it's mainly related to the two cities, so to the city of Madrid and Umeå. How do you actually incorporate everything that we've discussed about today, so addressing these vulnerable groups and mobility in your SUMPs? Have you done this?
Well, in Umeå, the mobility plan is integrated into the comprehensive plan. So it's so we have there are in the policy documents, there are writings about gender equality and power. I think that for one of the important things that we've seen is the importance of it being in the comprehensive plan, so that if it's not in the comprehensive plan, then it won't be in the detailed plan, and if it's not in the detailed plan, then it won't be in the streets and parks program for public space, and then it won't be in the building permits. So this having this process, or this red line going through the entire planning process, I think is really important. And then in the policy programs, or in the SUMPs or the comprehensive plan, then it's going to be something that talks about gender equality and the power to shape your own lives and so on. And then it gets more and more concrete going through the public administrations. I think if we don't have those writings about gender equality as an important issue, then it's difficult for the streets and parks to actually have the dialogue with only young girls. So I think one of the important things for me is, I think, to really see that it's a red line going through the planning process.
In Spain, there is the
Closer to the mic, Isabella, thank you.
Sorry, the gender assessment is compulsory in all the plans, in all the urban plans in Spain. So the SUMP has to make this gender assessment. Then what we are doing in Eccentric is try to test tools and concepts and guidelines, and then with all these experiences, try to influence through the gender assessment the SUMP that is now starting its review. Then we have very good probabilities of include these conclusions in the SUMP.
Thank you. Bronan, would you like to add something, since you will be contributing a lot to the SUMP 2.0 process?
Yeah, I think I must just take the opportunity to say to Linda, I think your presentation was really interesting. I found it very insightful, and it's that level of that overall commitment and building it in. So that's why with the charter we start with inclusive mobility, and it underpins every other decision that is made. And with the SUMP guidelines that we will be developing, or the practitioners briefings, this inclusivity is the central component of that. And I would love to draw down some examples from our 2 cities for that, to illustrate how that is. It just has to be a fundamental principle. But what was so important from Linda's presentation is, because we've had the same progress with walking, is you can't just say it. You actually have to have the data and the means, and the methods, and the processes to integrate it and to move it up the priority.
Thank you. On this note, I would like to wrap up the webinar, since we are already 15 minutes late due to this very interesting topic and the very interesting cases we've heard from today. Thank you everyone for joining us today and for being active and for being involved in the discussions with our speakers. Thank you very much to our lady speakers for taking the time to join our webinar, and to my UBC colleagues that set up the scene for this webinar and supported us throughout the entire event. We hope that you found this webinar very interesting. You will benefit from the recording. So because you have registered for the webinar, you will automatically receive the recording of the webinar. And we are looking forward to welcoming you to the next CIVITAS Eccentric thematic webinar. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting.